Hi class, I want to go over the midterm and review. I had a lot of students that requested this and said, hey, Dr. George, I need you to help me on this to get a good study guide for that. So I'm creating this video. I did have a student that was having a little difficulties understanding it because I go over a lot of it orally on these quizzes. And what I want you to do is to understand that you can pause the videos, okay, and write down and copy this and then do the answers and take the time to create a really good study guide so when you're taking the test, you're able to use this study guide that you created with a pen and paper and then use that with taking the quiz. So let's start with the first one. So we have a production possibility curve here, and we have our corn and our coffee. And so when we're moving from point A to point B, we're looking at it right here. So point A to point B, for the corn, we're looking at a $2 million change or 2 million bushels difference. For coffee, it would only be 1 million. Okay? So that's how we would look at that. So for every corn that we have to produce 1 million coffee, it will require me to give up 2 million corn. All right. So the next here is a question that what I would like you to look at, and here I'll read it to you. Suppose there are 100 consumers with identical individual demand curves, and when the price of a movie ticket is $8, the quantity demand for each person is 5. When the price is $4, the quantity demand for each person is 9. Assuming the law of demand holds, which means that when it changes, that the demand would change as well in a linear function, which of the following choices most likely quantity demand in the market when the price is 6? So if you look here and you just write out 8, 6, and 4, and if you write next to it 8 is equal to 5 demanded, and that 6 is the question mark which we're looking for, and then 5, the next one was 4, we would look at it and say that it's 9. So when looking at this, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. If I $8 and then go to 5 demanded, and then here I will say that it is 6, and then it is question mark here where we don't know what is demanded. And then here is our last one at $4. Oops, $4 demanded. We have 9. Okay. And so one of the things that we can look at here is that what is the difference, right? And so the in-between price of 8, 6, and 4, that we can come up with the answer that it would be 7, right? But the question asks us what is the demand curve, so we would have to times that by the 100, where we have 100 consumers. So the correct answer would be 700. All right. So the next one is a question of looking at this and saying, okay, how does this chart work? So what we're looking at here is the price per quart, quantity demanded, and then the quantity supplied. So at 60 here, we look at it is that quantity demanded is 60, so we have 140. So there is an excess supply of milk. At 50 cents, we have a equilibrium, so there is just enough demand and just enough supply. At 0.70 here, we see that there is a excess in supply here. So 20 is what is demanded, and we have a supply of 180. Only 20 people are going to purchase it. So that's how this works. In there is that you'll have another question. So you have a couple of questions on this, on these types of quantity demanded versus quantity supplied. For example, another example is if what they do is they tell you what is the demand, and that they're going to do the what should the price be. So for example here, if we say that the demand was 100 units here, then it would have to be 50 cents is how they would come up with that on the quiz. So understanding that, that's a second question. That's something else that you would like to write down. In there is that you'll also have another couple of questions on there where it talks about the price elasticity of demand. So you really want to go over that. You'll have a question on that. So a great way of thinking of this would be here is that it would say that you go to Starbucks and you're going to decide, and you go there and all of a sudden Starbucks has increased the price of its coffee. And so why is this? How is this going to here? So you would have to figure out the price price elasticity of demand, write that formula down in there for that. Now let's go ahead and let's look at this demand curve here. Okay, so in this demand curve there are some price elasticity of demand that's going on. So in here is what is the difference between the 2 points, between point A and point B. Okay, so in here is that we figure out that the price of elasticity of demand is going to be 1. Okay, and we look at that and figure out that as the price per unit is going up, right, we see that quantity is going down, okay, because less people are doing it. And so how we come up with that is following that price elasticity of demand equation. And here from point A to point B, we come up with a answer of 1 in there. So understanding that is important so that you can get a good quiz grade on that. Here's another one for supply and demand. Okay, so here is our supply and demand graph that we have for a good X. And we're looking at here, and we're looking at the price elasticity of demand for good axis between point E and point B. Okay, so how will we come up with this, right? So here is how we're looking at the price differences between points E and B. And what we're going to figure out here is how do we come up with a how we come up with the differences here so that we can have a the price differences here so that we can find out where that equilibrium is. So understanding this graph is really key in understanding how to be successful on the quiz, because there is a couple of questions, I would say about 4 of them, that go over supply and demand, the elasticity of demand for goods here, finding out the difference between right here E and B. All right, so how will we find that out? Where is that answer going to come from in there? The next thing that we will look at here is the marginal revenue. So what is marginal revenue? So making sure that you have that written down and understood, and a good example of how you came up with marginal revenue. A great question for this would be our next graph. So actually, no, I'll skip on that graph, but I'll go over it orally here. Is that if at a price of $5, you have 24 units of good that would be sold. At a price of $7, 25 units of output would be sold. The marginal revenue of that 25th unit of output is, and that's what you're going to have to figure that out. So making sure that you have a good understanding of that is important. All right, so let's look here at the demand curve for Genotech. It's monopolistic with a patent vaccine. All right, so what is the maximum hourly profit that Genotech could earn from its vaccine? All right, so here we would be looking for that. Okay, so we would see right here where our it's right here where we right there, and it would hit at their marginal revenue, and that we would see that at the quantity, and we would see that that would be 3,000. All right, so our maximum hourly profit that we can do, the quantity of vaccinations here, and that would be the revenue per dose, or the price in there, and then hundreds for that, so we can see that it would be 3,000. All right, let's go on and let's look at the next one. And the next question that we'll go over is monopoly. So understanding how the monopoly works here. So how does that monopoly price work at $10? Let's say if there was one that had a $10, how much would it be in there? So remember, monopoly would be the demand at the highest level equal to that quantity. And that's what they would get you on for that. So that output would be the monopoly. Now, last week we had a couple of quizzes on the GDP data. Review those videos or your notes if you did them, because there's a couple of GDP data and gross domestic product data questions. And then there is a consumer price index question in here as well that you should go over. The consumer index question that asks in this question is, what is the rate of inflation for 2 years? So you're going to be looking at that difference in price and then figuring out that inflation rate. Same thing as we did last week in the quizzes. All right. So in there is that you also have a couple of questions that are going over GDP and other questions in there, so making sure that you understand that. Here is a great question that we'll go over together. If the real disposable income increases from 110,000 to 120,000 and consumption increases from 108,000 to 114,000, the marginal is consumed is, and in this case, we would look at it and find out that it equals to 0.6. So we would look it up and find out how we're coming up with that equation and writing that down so that we have it, and that would be 0.6. All right. In there is that we do have some other questions in there about the real GDP and the demand for that. And so making sure that you have those in there. Let's go over the next question here is a balance sheet question of a bank, and they're asking you to do the reserve. There is 2 questions on this, okay? This is one of the question charts that they'll be using. Actually, there's 3 questions on the reserves in there. Actually, sorry, there's 5 questions on the reserve. So this is a very important question that you'll have to go over. So in this question here is that what is the required reserve ratio in this exhibit here? And what we find out here is that we have the required reserves is 4,000 and that the excess reserves is 16,000. So for a total of 20,000. And we find out that the checkable deposits here is 20,000 over here. So in that is that we have to have a reserve of 20%. The required reserve is 4,000 is 20% of 20,000. All right. The next question that I will go over with you will be the last one. And then I'm going to wish you good luck on your midterm. And that is going to be questions that that are in here is that basically what they're asking you to do is the GDP and what is the velocity of money in there. So making sure that you know that for that question. So there are 3 questions on that in the question in there. So a great example here is that if required reserve ratio is 20% for all banks, and every bank and the banking system loans out all of its excess reserves, then $10,000 deposited from someone in a checkable deposit could create the entire banking system to do what? Well, in that case, if there is 10,000 in there and there is a required reserve ratio of 20%, then a $10,000 deposit could be worth $40,000 of new money. If you have any questions, I'm here to help you. It is 27 questions, the midterm. You have, I believe, a good hour to knock it out. In doing this, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm here to help.